The midday light in the boardroom of Whitman and Sons Construction's headquarters in Redwood Falls, Illinois, seemed almost cruelly bright. Beams of sun piercing the tall windows like spotlights, illuminating every polished surface, every wrinkle of anxiety on the faces gathered there. It was an irony that did not go unnoticed by me. I sat at the head of the sleek walnut conference table, hands folded in my lap while my brother spoke. "We need fresh ideas, not old blood." His words landed like a hammer blow. Tristan Whitman looked directly at me as he said it, his gaze sharp enough to cut glass. I felt a faint tremor of surprise, but no anger. "My name is Jason Whitman, and until a few minutes ago I was senior project director at our family firm, 45 years old with a lifetime of loyalty behind me. Redwood Falls was our home and the cradle of our company, founded by our grandfather with nothing more than a battered wheelbarrow and 2 aging pickup trucks. Our father took what that small operation was and transformed it into something substantial, a multi-state powerhouse of commercial construction. I joined straight out of the state university armed with a freshly minted bachelor's in business and threw myself into hauling lumber and mixing concrete. Within a decade, I had tripled our profits and earned the trust of our top clients, steering the completion of the Crest Peak Tower when most said our firm wasn't ready for a project of that scale. And yet today, Tristan sat across from me in his crisp suit, polished shoes tapping out a quiet rhythm against the marble floor, declaring that my decades of work counted for nothing. The room went instantly silent. Peter Pete's broad shoulders slumped. He stared down at the knot in his tie. Marty from finance shuffled a sheaf of papers, as though trying to find an excuse in the fine print. Every pair of eyes in the room refused to meet mine, but Tristan's. He maintained that infuriating, satisfied smirk, as if he were doing me a favor. I breathed deeply. Let them expect outrage. Let them wait for the outburst. I would not give him the satisfaction. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, offered a small, polite nod, and then sat very still. Finally, I looked up. "Good luck," I said evenly. They blinked. I rose, buttoned my jacket with deliberate calm, and walked out. The board members exchanged confused glances. Some undoubtedly believed I'd snap back in their direction, to yell, to plead, to remind them of all I'd accomplished. That would have played right into Tristan's hands, casting me as the hot-headed older brother, the emotional one, the leader who couldn't let go of the past. But I stepped into the hallway, held onto my composure, and let the door click softly behind me. In the deserted corridor, I paused beside my old pickup, once the family's workhorse, now my personal pride, and stared at its faded green paint. 22 years with Whitman and Sons. I had started hauling lumber when I was 23, fresh out of college. I spent my 30s working 6 days a week, and in the process I missed 2 family vacations, my daughter's swim meets, and even the deterioration of my first marriage. Every sacrifice was made for this company. Every blood, sweat, and tear was for Whitman and Sons. I fished my phone from my pocket and scrolled to an email from yesterday afternoon, the one from Stonecraft Ventures confirming that they were awarding the new $3,200,000 0-cents office complex to Forge Build Solutions instead of us. Forge Build Solutions? That was the name of the LLC I'd quietly formed 6 months ago. I smiled to myself. Tristan thought firing me would weaken the company's grip on its best clients. What he didn't realize was that I was the only thing keeping Stonecraft, and so many others, from walking away. Leaving the building for the last time, I climbed into my truck and put it in gear. The engine growled to life, a familiar comfort, and I drove straight toward the old West Side district, where I'd rented a small office that would serve as the birthplace of my next venture. It was nothing glamorous, just a reception area with rented chairs and 2 cramped private offices, above an accountant's practice. The signage on the door still bore the previous tenant's name. I hadn't bothered to change it. Why draw attention when the clients I needed already knew where to find me? I rolled to a stop outside, killed the engine, and sat there for a moment, letting the excitement pulse through me. While Tristan was busy courting bankers, appeasing investors, and entertaining strategy consultants, he had overlooked something crucial. Personal relationships are the true foundation of any business. And those relationships had been mine to nurture from day one. Inside my pocket, my phone buzzed insistently. It was Tristan calling me no fewer than 5 times in the last 3 minutes. I let it ring. Then I answered. "Jason? What on earth is going on?" His voice was taut with panic, the high pitch I recognized from so many childhood squabbles, when he realized I had outmaneuvered him yet again. I let my smile creep into my tone. "Did Stonecraft call you?" I asked. "Yeah," he snapped. "They say they signed with Forge Build Solutions. Is that you?" I laughed softly. "I secured my future the way you secured your title, Tristan." He drew in a breath, fury cascading through his staccato words. "Those clients belong to Whitman and Sons." "No, Tristan. They belonged to Jason Whitman, because I earned their trust." I leaned back in my seat. "When you fired me yesterday, you didn't fire a project director. You fired the only person those clients wanted." There was a long silence. I could imagine him pacing the gleaming floors of our old office, mind racing. "This isn't legal," he finally said. "Go ahead and sue," I told him. "I never took proprietary data, I didn't solicit anything while on the payroll, and I never signed a non-compete, so I'm in the clear. I'm just a builder, and I'm building somewhere else now." He stammered for a moment, words tumbling as he tried to regain control. "We're brothers, we can work this out." I felt a cold finality settle over me. "We were brothers yesterday, too," I said. "That didn't stop you from humiliating me in front of the board." "It was business," he insisted. "Our family name is on that building," I countered. "Everything you do there is personal." He hesitated, then, "What do you want? Money? A board seat?" I shook my head. "Nothing from you. I've already got what I need. These clients represent over 60% of Whitman and Sons' revenue. You'll have to answer to the banks when those loans get called in." A defeated sigh on the other end. "Sounds like you've got a problem, Jason." "That I do," I said, and then I hung up. I sat there, staring at the blank nameplate on my office door, feeling none of the triumph I'd expected. Instead, there was only a hollow silence. The last severed tie. The final bridge burned between me and the life I'd known. I was on my own now. And oddly, it felt right. 3 days later, the one person I thought might understand appeared at my door. Peter Pete, my father's longtime right hand, walked in as I reviewed resumes for the project managers I planned to poach. His posture was as solid as ever, though a faint weariness creased the corners of his eyes. He studied the sparse furnishings. "Nice setup," he said. "Very startup." I didn't look up. "It's temporary." He folded his hands on his lap and leaned forward. His voice was low, gentle. "What do you want, Jason?" I met his gaze, saw in him the same mixture of pride and concern I'd seen in my father so many times. I took a breath, bracing for the next step of this new journey. I closed the office door behind Peter Pete and leaned against the smooth wood, letting his words settle around me like falling dust. "The board called an emergency meeting yesterday," he'd said, eyes grave. "Tristan told them what you did." I pictured the boardroom ablaze with tension, Tristan standing tall behind the lectern as he painted me the villain. "What I did?" I'd asked. "Interesting way to frame it. He says I stole our biggest clients. Says I've been planning this for months." Peter Pete's narrow gaze flicked to the resume still clutched in my hand. "The board's talking about suing you, Jason." A slow, rueful smile curled my lips. "Let him," I said. "My lawyer says I'm clean." He pressed his hands together, as though stealing his next words. "This isn't just about what's legal. It's about what's right. Your father built that company for both of you." His appeal landed harder than I cared to admit. The memory of Dad pivoting in his office chair, telling Tristan and me we were destined to lead Whitman and Sons together. It flooded back, softening my spine for a moment. But then I saw Tristan's expression that day on the boardroom dais. Smug triumph, as if he'd orchestrated my public downfall by design. A single thought cut through the doubt. That was no mistake. My leaving was his choice, I reminded Pete. A birthday forgotten, that's a mistake. Ambushing me in front of 20 board members after months of sidelining me, that was strategy. Pete rubbed the bridge of his nose. "The company's in real trouble, Jason. The bank's getting nervous." I stiffened. "Without those projects, I know exactly where we stand. I ran operations for 15 years. I can do the numbers in my sleep." His eyes softened, but only slightly. "Everything your father built, everything you built, hangs in the balance." He pushed off the desk. "What do you want, Jason?" I met his gaze squarely. "I'm not interested in returning under Tristan's thumb. but I can't let Whitman and Sons collapse. Too many people would suffer. Employees, subcontractors, even mom and dad. He nodded slowly. The board meeting's tomorrow at noon. They're voting on that lawsuit. And there's more. Tristan has been calling your subcontractors, warning them against working with you. He's threatening to blacklist anyone who touches JW Buildworks. That revelation cut me like ice water. Tristan hadn't just fought dirty. He'd targeted my lifeblood. As soon as Pete left, my phone erupted with voicemails. Electricians, plumbers, foremen, all apologizing, terrified to lose the steady flow of Whitman work. By dusk, I'd lost commitments from nearly every specialty team I needed. My nascent plans were unraveling thread by thread. I paced the empty office until the sky darkened outside my window. Each ring of my cell felt like a nail hammered into JW Buildworks' coffin. I realized then that Tristan wasn't merely protecting Whitman and Sons. He was waging total war, and with every subcontractor who turned away, he was winning. The next morning, before sunrise, I climbed back into my truck and drove out to my parents' farmhouse on the outskirts of Redwood Falls. The winding gravel lane, lined with cedar and ash, was a childhood memory, longer than my adult troubles. Their house, perched on 5 acres of rolling lawn, was the first big investment Dad made once orders started flooding in decades ago. He had always said a builder needed land to keep his perspective. Mom met me on the porch, her arms wrapping around me with fierce relief. Behind her, Dad sat in his favorite rocking chair, staring at the horizon. As I approached, he shifted his gaze, but didn't speak. "Hey, Dad," I said, settling into the chair beside him. We rocked in silence, the world awakening around us. Roosters crowing, wind whispering through the pines. He finally spoke, voice creaking like the chair's wood. "Your brother says you're trying to sink the company." "That's not it," I replied softly. "I'm building something of my own after he pushed me out." Dad's worn features creased with concern. "You couldn't work it out? You two were meant to carry on together." "Tell that to Tristan," I said, bitterness trailing the words. "He fired me in front of the entire board. Then he called my clients and told them I was a thief." He frowned, studying my face. "And they still came to you?" I nodded. "Because I never stole their trust. I earned it." His expression darkened. "You need to understand what's really at stake." He turned his head to scan the fields. "The company's deeper in debt than you know." My heart thudded. "How deep?" "Tristan's grand expansion plans," Dad said, voice low. "On paper, every quarter looked profitable. But he's been borrowing, using future contracts as collateral. Those 5 big clients you secured, their projects were already leveraged to banks." My stomach lurched. "So, without those contracts, the banks could call in the loans?" "Exactly," he said. "The day after tomorrow, if they do, they'll take every asset, equipment, land, even this house could be repossessed to cover debts." I closed my eyes, images of the company's heavy machinery, my parents' land, my own dream offices flashing through my mind. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" He sighed, head bowed. "I should have. I retired trusting Tristan. I believed in his vision. But I missed the signs, the off-color briefings, the private consultants, the boardroom games." I slid from the rocking chair, pacing the porch. "If that lawsuit goes through, it'll finish everything." "Your mother and I don't want that," he said, rising to stand beside me. "But we also can't watch you destroy yourself, or the legacy your grandfather and I built." I squared my shoulders. "Then I need a plan. A way to save JW Buildworks and stave off Whitman and Sons' collapse." Dad placed a hand on my arm. "You don't have to do it alone. But time is against you. The board votes tomorrow, and the banks already smell blood." I swallowed hard. "What do you suggest?" He drew a deep breath and met my eyes. "Negotiate. Not with Tristan. He's too invested in winning. But with those 5 clients. If they're willing to split projects between JW Buildworks and Whitman and Sons, give them a reason to stay on both sides. You can slow the debt crisis and undercut Tristan's lawsuit." I ran a hand through my hair. "You mean ask them to commit to 2 companies simultaneously? That's a hard sell after everything that's happened." Dad nodded gravely. "Trust is fragile, but it can be rebuilt if handled carefully. Your clients respect you. If you position this as a bridge to save people's jobs, your people's, and the Whitman legacy, you might pull it off. I paused, imagining Ben Harding's stony expression when I'd first proposed he meet Tristan. It'll take more than a phone call. He looked out across the grass where the sun glinted on dew-speckled oak leaves. You need a formal proposal. Terms, structure, guarantees. Draw it up tonight and call those clients again. Ask them to meet. The clock ticked toward noon. I realized I had less than 20 hours to craft a document that might turn the tide. What about Tristan? I asked. Dad sighed. He's not a partner anymore. Let him find out secondhand. Your negotiation shouldn't be with him, but with the clients and the board. Show them a path forward that's better than bankruptcy. I nodded. All right, I'll do it. That afternoon, back at my small office, I shut the door and spread legal pads, financial statements, and my laptop across the desk. Every time the phone rang, I jumped, but it was only my lawyer with a drafted framework. She'd outlined co-sponsorship agreements, revenue-sharing models, and phased debt repayments. Her language was precise, each clause designed to reassure banks and clients alike that neither company would overextend. As dusk fell, I dialed Ben Harding's number. He answered on the third ring. Jason? I've been worried. I leaned forward. Ben, I need your help again. Can you review this proposal tonight and join me in meeting with Tristan, with Whitman's board, tomorrow at noon? I want you to advocate for splitting the Crestwell project. Silence. Then, after everything, you still trust me to do that? Because you know both sides, I said, and because I believe you want what's best for your project crews. He exhaled slowly. All right, send it over. I'll read it this evening. One by one, I called the other 4 clients, each conversation a tightrope of diplomacy. They were hesitant, anxious about offending Whitman and Sons, yet weary of the suit's rhetoric. In the end, each agreed to attend the board meeting and consider a dual vendor arrangement if the terms were fair. At midnight, bleary-eyed but determined, I compiled the final proposal, an opening letter that acknowledged the personal rift but emphasized shared heritage. A detailed exhibit mapping which phases each company would handle, a finance schedule that would free Whitman and Sons from its most burdensome loans, and a binding clause guaranteeing seamless coordination between the 2 firms' project managers. As I hit send to Tristan and the board secretary, I hesitated, then closed the laptop. Outside, a late winter breeze rattled the blinds. I realized this was the most important project of my life. Not a building, but a lifeline thrown across a family schism. Before dawn, I rose and made black coffee, then sat at my desk, rehearsing the pitch. Calm, factual, yet heartfelt. I reminded myself that this wasn't just about business. It was about legacy, livelihoods, and a chance to prove that collaboration can triumph over rivalry. When the first rays of sun crept across the rooftop, I gathered the printed proposal, straightened my tie, and prepared to face the board. No matter the outcome, I knew I'd done everything in my power to protect JW Buildworks and salvage Whitman and Sons. The boardroom door loomed ahead, a threshold between fracturing bitterness and a fragile reconciliation. With a steady breath, I stepped forward, ready to build the next chapter, brick by careful brick. I barely slept that night. After hanging up with Tristan, I sat at my desk long after the streetlights outside had flickered off. The proposal lay open before me, a single sheet of paper that carried the weight of 2 lifetimes of family legacy. Every time I drifted toward sleep, my mind snapped back to the plan, the role each party would play, the delicate balance of debt relief versus divided contracts, the hope that this bargain could salvage both JW Buildworks and Whitman and Sons. My eyes burned by dawn, but clarity had arrived alongside the sunrise. I cleaned up the margins of my notes, double-checked the financial figures, and printed out 2 crisp copies. Exactly at 7 a.m., down to the minute, Tristan appeared in my doorway. He looked as though he'd been wrestling with the same demons. His tailored suit was immaculate, but dark circles ringed his eyes, and his usual swagger was gone. He hesitated in the threshold, hands stuffed into his pockets. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, voice tight. "Why offer to help me after everything I did?" I gestured to the chair opposite my desk and settled into my own. "I'm not doing this for you," I said evenly. I'm doing it for Dad, for the employees, for the Whitman name that still sits atop that building." His posture relaxed fractionally, and he sank into the chair. I slid the first copy of the proposal across the desk. Its bold header read, "Strategic Partnership Agreement, JW Buildworks and Whitman and Sons." Tristan picked it up, brows furrowed. "We split the 5 major clients," I continued. 3 remain with Whitman, 2 go to JW Buildworks. That keeps the banks comfortable and gives both companies revenue to stand on." He tapped the paper. "It also says I have to step down as CEO." "It does," I said. "Dad returns as interim CEO, we appoint a neutral successor, and all expansion projects go on hold indefinitely." His lips pressed into a thin line. "So I get my revenge, after all." I shook my head. "This isn't revenge, it's triage. We save what's worth saving, and let the rest go." His gaze sharpened. "And if I refuse?" I met his eyes. "You keep all 5 clients." I let the words hang. "The moment you default on those loans, Whitman and Sons collapses. The board knows it, the banks know it. Your choice." Silence stretched. Tristan's jaw worked as he flicked through page after page of the agreement. Revenue share schedules, governance structures, non-compete clauses calibrated to protect both firms. It was the document of his downfall, and paradoxically, his deliverance. Minutes ticked by. The Tristan I once knew, the one who'd never backed down, would have torn it to shreds or stormed out in fury. But the man before me was drained. The weight of a crumbling empire bore down on him. Finally, he closed the folder, exhaled, and picked up a pen. His signature was deliberate, almost mournful. He stood, handing the signed copy back. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the doorway and looked at me in a way he never had before. No arrogance, no resentment, just something almost like respect. "I really thought I was doing the right thing," he admitted quietly. "For the company." I didn't reply. Some things aren't meant to be answered. After he left, I called Dad first, barely able to contain relief in my voice. Then I phoned each client individually, explaining the new arrangement. By high noon, the paperwork was filed with the board secretary, and the banks had received our restructuring plan. It wasn't the triumphant victory I had once fantasized about. There was no dramatic takedown of my brother, no rousing speech about justice. Instead, there was the quiet satisfaction of crafting something sustainable. 2 companies, each with clear purpose, each alive. 6 months later, I stood amid the rising skeleton of the Crestwell office complex. Steel beams gleamed like cathedral ribs against the sky, and 3 concrete floors were already poured. My floors. Under my company's banner. I ran a hand along a hot steel column and felt the hum of progress beneath my gloves. Across town, Whitman and Sons had endured. Dad had guided it through the roughest season of his life, then stepped back again, leaving Diane Caldwell, our newly appointed CEO, to steady the ship. Reports said she'd already turned the company toward healthier profit margins, focused on smaller projects instead of Tristan's grand gambits. I heard footsteps and turned to see Ben Harding approaching, his hard hat tucked under one arm. He smiled as he surveyed the site. "Looking good, Jason." "On schedule?" I asked, wiping sweat from my brow. 2 weeks ahead," he replied. "Not surprised. That's why we followed you in the first place." His praise warmed me. Then his gaze drifted to the horizon. "You know," he said slowly, "your brother called me last week." I paused, surprised. "Tristan?" Ben nodded. "He wanted to apologize. Said he'd made a mistake letting you go. Said you were the one who really understood what made Whitman work." I swallowed. "What did you say?" He shrugged. I told him thanks. "Did he mention what he's doing now?" I asked. He said he's starting something new in Denver, wanted contacts. Ben grinned wryly. I gave him a few names. "I studied the sky. That okay with you?" "Of course," he said. "If he's learning the Whitman way, building rather than tearing down, good." We spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing construction schedules, delivery dates, and subcontractor assignments. The conversation was routine, but my mind wandered back to my brother's phone call. Maybe this really was the Whitman legacy, fierce competition tempered by the possibility of reconciliation. The understanding that we build better together than we destroy alone. Exactly 1 year after the board meeting that cost me my old life, I pulled up outside Whitman and Sons headquarters. The glass and steel facade looked unchanged, but the company inside was different. Leaner, humbler, wiser. The lobby's new art installation celebrated past projects rather than future plans. The bull market buzz had been replaced by quiet determination. It hadn't returned until now. I walked through the revolving doors, heart pounding with memories. Some colleagues paused in the hall and offered polite nods, surprised but not hostile. I nodded back, grateful that 6 months of division hadn't destroyed every bridge. The elevator carried me to the executive wing. I felt my palms sweat as I approached the conference room where it all began. When the doors opened, Dad was standing at the end of the long mahogany table, flanked by Diane Caldwell and a handful of board members. The same room, but different faces and a different energy. Behind Dad, 3 large framed photographs hung on the wall. Our grandfather with his original pickup trucks, Dad breaking ground on that first major commercial site in '88, and me shaking hands with the mayor atop the Meridian Tower podium a decade ago. Diane's idea, Dad explained later, was to remind everyone why we do this work. For legacy, for community, for family. Jason, Dad said softly, motioning me forward. We wanted you to see this. I stepped into the room, heart full. Diane smiled warmly, gesturing to an empty seat beside her. I sat, absorbing the silence. You built something remarkable this year, Dad said, eyes misting slightly. Your work on Crestwell, it's inspired. I'm proud of you. Thanks, Dad, I managed, voice tight. We didn't mention Tristan. No apology seemed adequate, and no reproach would change the past. Instead, I let the moment stand as proof that new beginnings can spring from old wounds. Later, I walked out of Whitman and Sons for the second time, but this time whole, unburdened by bitterness. The sun slanted across the parking lot, and I breathed deeply, feeling the warmth of possibility. I had lost half a lifetime to that boardroom that day last year, but I had gained perspective. That building something of enduring value often means laying aside pride, sharing credit, and forging partnerships even with those who once betrayed you. The road ahead for both JW Buildworks and Whitman and Sons would be long and winding, but the foundations were solid, trust earned, relationships honored, and a family name that still mattered. As I climbed into my truck and drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror at the skyscraper-dotted skyline of Redwood Falls. I didn't look back. Forward was where I needed to be, constructing tomorrow, one beam at a time.